Tipping culture in the US is out of control. From hotels to retail orders now, but nowhere is tipping as prevalent and as expected as in the restaurant industry. People should not be made to feel guilty for not wanting to tip.
And relying so heavily on tips can have negative consequences for employees as well.
In order to solve this problem, we're first going to need to start with getting rid of the tipped minimum wage. And alright, I understand that most servers make the most of their money from tips. So before you come at me, I have a way to address that. I'm not saying that tipping should be banned. I'm saying that the cash wage paid to servers at minimum must equal to the minimum wage in the state. You should not be allowed to receive any less. And so what I'm referring to here is that $2.13 an hour and the rest being made up by tips. No, the minimum that any server or anyone that's in a tip profession should be allowed to receive is the actual minimum wage of the state. It can be more, but no less. Here I'm going to go over why we don't do this common sense solution and how getting rid of the tip minimum wage is actually a win for everyone except for people who are breaking the law. And I'll go over as well for the people who say that getting rid of the tip minimum wage is not possible. I'll go over why that's bullshit. Before we get started, this is Clear Money Tea. Thanks for stopping by. Please like, comment, subscribe. All right, let's get into it. For some quick background to understand this issue, most states have different laws when it comes to paying out the minimum wage, especially as it relates to those who receive tips. Federally, as we all know, the minimum wage is $7.25, and those who receive at least $30 a month in tips are able to receive a lesser cash wage. So those people are eligible to be able to receive $2.13 an hour, and any tips can be applied to cover the shortfall to that $7.25 minimum wage. And so if someone doesn't receive enough tips, then the employer has to pay out. And different states may also have higher minimum wages than the $7.25 federal minimum as well. You can see the differences in their direct cash pay and then the tip minimum, and you add those two up together and you're going to get the state minimum wage that the employer is supposed to ensure that the employee is getting paid. So in no state is an employee supposed to be earning $2.13 an hour. They can get that in cash, but the employer is supposed to make sure that they get at least the state minimum wage. And we have a few unicorn states, 7 states who actually have a direct cash wage that is equal to the minimum wage of that state. DC and Guam have this too, and effectively Hawaii does as well. So you may be wondering, if employers still have to pay the minimum wage, why is this entire discourse even happening? Either we have customers who tip to make sure that the employee gets the minimum wage, or the business increases their menu prices and then they're able to effectively pay the minimum wage as well. So between those two options, what does it even matter? Why would businesses be so upset with having to pay a direct cash wage? The secret is that they're committing rampant wage theft. 85% of restaurants were found to have committed wage theft violations in 2021. In 2023, over 6,000 employees received over $4 million from tip violations. And that's just what was paid. Imagine how much doesn't come to light. Because of that, corporate lobbyists like the NRA, not that one, the National Restaurant Association, backed by big restaurant groups, don't want this to change. It's so easy for restaurants not to pay their employees the correct amount. It's difficult for employees to track, and it puts the onus on the employee to follow up on errors that the employer is making. Even when employees do try, it can be difficult to put through legitimate cases. For example, here is a large class action lawsuit on behalf of 20,000 employees that was filed over tip violations and was dismissed on technicalities. The lawsuit was initially filed by a Longhorn server on behalf of the corporation that operates not just that group, but other well-known restaurants like Olive Garden as well. However, if we were to change the system, everyone could potentially benefit. We have employees who can benefit by having the knowledge that they will receive a steady minimum paycheck. Even when there's slow days, there'll be consistency in their pay. They also can make more money in states where the cash pay equals the state minimum wage. There are lower poverty rates for tipped workers, and there's benefits of increased equity. A study found that during the pandemic, Black employees had higher decreases in tips. However, being less reliant on tips would lessen this disparity. Working for tips as well can lead employees to be vulnerable to hostile customers or sexual assault. Penn State conducted a study in which they found tipped workers who had to smile more faced more sexual harassment. Customers can benefit as well. So clear benefits for the customer in terms of a more consistent dining experience, in terms of what's expected to be paid. They also won't be made to feel guilty for not directly paying employees wages when actually the onus is on the employer to be charging enough to have that covered. When the cash minimum wage equals the state minimum wage, then the story is of, oh, but the server only makes $2.13 an hour goes right out the window. Customers can be ensured during their dining experience that the employee is being paid appropriately. And if they decide to give a tip for good service, then they can do that knowing that it's a tip and not a requirement. Governments benefit, aka us, the taxpayer, as well. It takes a lot to enforce the tipped minimum wage. The government is the one prosecuting and fighting on a lot of these lawsuits for tip wage violations. And they also spend a good amount of money as well trying to inform employees as well of the rights to be paid the deficit between the cash wage and the minimum wage. Instead, with a simpler system, that money could be directed elsewhere. Lastly, employers can benefit as well. If you're not just like out there committing wage theft, then it should be a benefit as well for you as there's less paperwork for you to deal with, and there's a decreased chance of you making a mistake that can get you into trouble. So there's a lot of naysayers who say this isn't possible for various reasons. So I'm going to go over a few common reasons and why they're just completely fucking wrong. So the first one that restaurant owners like to try and hold over people's head, but I'll have to raise prices. I'm just going to say how it's funny that Olive Garden in California, there where the minimum wage is $16 an hour and they have to pay a direct cash minimum wage of 16, and you look at the menu price there and then you compare it to the menu price in Texas where they only have to pay the 213 and then up to the 725 if for any tips that don't make the shortfall. So tell me why that the price is not like in half in Texas compared to California. Also, why hasn't Olive Garden left California if it's so onerous for them to be paying the minimum wage? Why haven't they left if California is so mean and so unsupportive to restaurant owners? If you find out, let me know because I'm fucking dying to know. So we have another one, employees who say that they won't make as much money. So I kind of already refuted that earlier where I was talking about poverty rates. The 2015 study found that the poverty rates among tipped workers were higher in states that had a tipped wage compared to states that only paid the minimum wage. Restaurant owners also might say that employees won't work as hard because now if they're not working for tips, there's no incentive for them to try and upsell. However, there are plenty of ways you can have workers upsell and also ensure that they're providing good service. You can do a sort of a commission structure, even if you don't require tips. You can still charge a service fee and have employees receive a portion of the service fee. You can also do some type of commission structure where if employees sell certain items that they get more, they get a higher commission. So there's plenty of ways that you can solve this. And it's up to the restaurants who are actual business owners to try and, think of innovative ways of how they want to run their business as well. A third reason that naysayers have is that they'll say that it hasn't worked before. So there definitely are restaurants that implemented a no tip policy and then reverted back to allowing tipping. So what I have to say to that is that I'm personally not advocating to say that you can't allow tips at all. I'm just saying that we need to get rid of this excessive culture of demanding tips. Also, there may be some restaurants who got rid of tips and instead charged the service fee, which I think is still fine to do, but restaurants also need to be clear and fair about how they're distributing and sharing the service fee. So it might seem like getting rid of tipping is a problem when in fact the restaurant is charging an 18% service fee and only giving 2% of it to the employee. So that's not going to be a problem with getting rid of tipping. That's actually going to be a problem with unequitable sharing of the service fee.
In fact, I think a service fee is a great way for getting rid of some of the uncertainty and guesswork that is surrounded with tipping today. Restaurant groups could advocate for a standard service fee for in service dining only, and then any additional tips afterwards would just be appreciated and not expected.
And the last one that I hear a lot is from owners saying that they're going to have to close down. And my response to that is quite honestly, then close down. If you really cannot afford to pay your employees a fair wage, then you shouldn't be in business. Keep in mind as well, whether it's through tips or increases in the menu prices, it really shouldn't be any changes at all to the patron because you should have been paying the minimum wage in the first place. If you raise your prices, then you can decrease the suggested tip amount. Overall, it shouldn't be an impact on the patron if you're paying your employees fairly. Overall, plenty of industries find a way to survive but without having to rely on an antiquated, excessive tipping culture. This culture needs to end in the US, and we can begin that process by changing the laws. Plenty of states are waking up to this fact, and there's plenty that we can do federally as well. Here we can see over 15 states have the 213 federal minimum cash pay. Those ones also have a minimum wage of $7.25 in that state. Over 20 states have a cash minimum wage of below $7.25, and then over 10 states have a cash minimum wage of above $7.25. And of those states, 7 have a cash minimum wage that equals the state minimum wage. So there's a lot of opportunity to have just one minimum wage.
And with that, we can change to society where tips are truly appreciated and not expected, and servers won't have to rely on generosity to receive a fair wage.